It's the chocolate apocalypse. What are we gonna do? Okay, maybe not apocalypse, so don't strap on your Mad Max cosplay yet, but we definitely feel the sting of our wallets crying out in sweet, sugary agony. See, your favorite treat, that delicious melt-in-your-mouth food of the gods, we'll get to that later, is about to cost you an arm and a leg, maybe even a kidney? From the ancient Mayo Chinchimpe people in Ecuador drinking this stuff way back in 3300 BCE, to the Aztecs using cocoa beans as currency, to the Spanish keeping it secret for decades, and then Europe goes wild. We've had a wild ride. We've had slavery, we've had pirates, we've had chocolate go from a drink to a bar, but now thanks to the devilish mix of local struggles and worldwide catastrophes, we're staring down the barrel of $12,000 per ton cocoa. In a normal market, cocoa would be around $2,000 per ton. It's $12,000. Or can we take advantage of this rapid price increase? It's such a fast rise in price, even the Bitcoin bros are looking jealous. Is it time for Cocoa YOLO? Should you start buying up cocoa futures like they're going out of style? Because at these prices, they practically are. Or would you bet that the cocoa apocalypse is going to get even worse and those prices are going to skyrocket? High risk, high reward, baby. You could be swimming in chocolate or crying into a pile of worthless cocoa contracts. How do we go from ancient Mesoamericans slurping down spicy cocoa drinks to us standing here wondering if we can afford a single measly chocolate bar, while a select few are about to get rich off our sweet suffering? But first, we need to talk about some history. This is a history channel, of course, but also the history of chocolate sets the stage for where we are today and how we got into this mess. Before all that, a word from our sponsor. And this is where our sponsor would be if we had one. Back to our story. Well, let's rewind the clock, shall we? Way back, like before your great grandparents were even a twinkle in anyone's eye, back around 3300 BCE. That's BCE, Metatron. I'm saying the E. You can take my life, but you can never take my E at the end of BCE. Anyways, back to the story. Way back before the pyramids, before the Romans, before almost everything, who was enjoying the earliest forms of chocolate? The Mayo Chinchimpe people living in what is now Ecuador. Now, we don't exactly know what they were doing with this magical bean, but we do know they were cultivating it and consuming it. Archaeologists found residue in their pottery, proving they were the OG chocolate lovers. They lived in the South American rainforest, where cacao trees naturally thrive. These trees only grow near the equator like a bunch of tropical divas. But quick language nerd aside, you might be wondering, why cacao trees but cocoa beans? Well, it's a bit of a linguistic mishmash. Cacao is the original word, likely from indigenous languages. Cocoa is what happened when English speakers tried to say cacao, and well, you know. Anyway, the switch from cacao to cocoa happens sometime after the beans are harvested and processed, usually after fermenting. So raw beans are cacao, fermented beans are cocoa. Back to the history. So the Mayo Chinchimpe, were they making hot chocolate? Were they dipping their ancient donuts? Were they using it as medicine? We can't be sure, but they clearly saw something special in those beans. Maybe it was a subtle caffeine kick, or maybe they just liked the taste. Whatever it was, they started the chocolate ball rolling, and it's been rolling ever since. Now fast forward a bit to around 1900 BCE. We're seeing some serious chocolate innovation happening in Mesoamerica. The Mocayan people from the Pacific coast of Chiapas, Mexico, were definitely drinking cacao. They also started to create varieties of the cacao tree, improving the quality of the fruit. Think of them as the early chocolate sommeliers. Then you got the Olmecs. Legend says they discovered chocolate after watching rats munching on the cacao fruit around from 1500 to 400 BCE. Rats, the unsung heroes of chocolate history. But instead of just eating the fruit, they fermented the pulp around the seeds into an alcoholic drink. They also crushed the cocoa beans, mixed them with spices like chilies, and basically created the ancestor of hot chocolate. Ancient Mesoamericans getting their buzz on with fermented cacao, then spicing things up with a little chili chocolate concoction. This delicious discovery spread like wildfire to the Mayans and Aztecs, who, as we'll see, took chocolate to a whole new level of fancy. On to the Mayans. Those ancient chocolate connoisseurs. By 600 BCE, they're all about cocoa. But this just wasn't your average hot chocolate on a cold morning when you have nothing better to do than read a good book by a fire and sip. Instead, the Mayans were using chocolate for official ceremonies, religious rituals, even medicinal purposes. Think of it as the ultimate VIP beverage. And now here's the kicker. It's a bit hazy whether your average Mayan Joe got to partake in the chocolatey goodness. It seems like it was mostly reserved for adult men because, those stimulating effects apparently too intense for women and children. And get this, by at least 400 BCE, cocoa beans were being used as currency. Shout out to our first video on commodity money. The Mayans even had a whole mythology surrounding chocolate, with gods like Ekchua, the patron god of cacao, and Hunahpu, the mythological figure credited with inventing cacao processing. They treated chocolate with the reverence it deserved, even offering it during noblemen's funerals. I assume they offered it to the attendees, as the noblemen couldn't really use it anymore. Basically, if you were anyone important in Mayan society, you were drinking chocolate. And they even introduced it to the Aztecs, setting the stage for even more chocolatey shenanigans. Now let's talk about the Aztecs, the emperors of chocolate indulgence. For them, chocolate wasn't just a drink, it was a luxury, a gift from the gods, specifically Quetzalcoatl. See, I told you that chocolate was the food of the gods, and the Aztecs even thought it was hallucinogenic, which, spoiler alert, it's not. They used cocoa beans as a symbol of the human heart. The Aztecs used chocolate as tribute to their rulers and offerings to their gods. Imagine paying your taxes in chocolate. Remember how I said the Mayans used cocoa beans as commodity money? The Aztecs continued that tradition. And, of course, it was mostly consumed by the elites, except for the soldiers on the battlefield, because apparently chocolate was the ancient Aztec energy drink. New from Monster Energy Drinks, Aztec Battlefield Energy. It's just hot chocolate. Most of the cacao in the Aztec Empire came from Soconusco, and the Aztecs were basically running a chocolate monopoly, demanding tribute in cocoa beans. By the time the Spanish showed up, there were a whopping 1.5 million cacao trees being grown there. They mostly drank it, sometimes mixed it with maize to make a gruel, and they loved their spices. Chili was the most common addition, but they also used honey, vanilla, annatto. So basically, the Aztecs were living the chocolate high life, and they were about to introduce it to some very surprised Europeans. In 1502, Christopher Columbus, that famous lost explorer who thought he found India, stumbles upon a native canoe in what is now Nicaragua. And what does he find? Cocoa beans. But he had absolutely no clue what they were. He just called them almonds. He basically missed the chocolate boat. Imagine the man who discovered America completely whiffed on discovering chocolate for Europe. It wasn't until his fourth voyage that one of his crew members actually noticed the value Mayans placed on these beans when a bag of them was dropped and the Mayans scrambled to pick them up. The crew knew something was up with these almonds, but they never figured out or, actually asked the Mayans. They never encountered the drink itself. Then enter Hernan Cortez, the Spanish conquistador who actually got to try the Aztec chocolate. He observed Moctezuma II's court in 1520, and he was hooked. By 1524, Spain had control over central Mexico, and Cortez was basically running a chocolate empire, expanding cacao production and demanding even more tribute. He even brought some cocoa beans and brewing equipment back to Spanish court in 1528. And, of course, the Spanish, being the savvy colonizers they were, kept this chocolate secret to themselves. They added their own twist, of course, throwing in some cane sugar and spices, and basically turned it into the fancy hot chocolate we know and love. When some English pirates captured a Spanish galleon, they burned the cocoa beans, thinking they were worthless. They thought they were sheep droppings. How do you confuse cocoa beans for sheep droppings? Why would they be carrying barrels of sheep poop in the Spanish ship? But eventually in 1585, the first official shipment of cocoa beans arrived in Spain, and the chocolate craze began. Chocolate shops started popping up, and the Spanish were all about the medicinal benefits of this magical bean. By the mid-16th century, they were producing chocolate in industrial quantities, and by the 17th century, Madrid had a stockpile of 700,000 pounds of cacao. The chocolate floodgates had opened in Europe. Excuse me while this gets a little dark for a bit. The Spanish are loving their chocolate, but there's a problem. The Native American population is tanking. Disease and brutal treatment decimated their numbers, and cocoa production was taking a hit. So what did the Spanish do? They turned to the transatlantic slave trade. As the indigenous population dwindled, the Spanish started importing African slaves to work on their cocoa plantations. By the end of the 17th century, the indigenous population was estimated to be only 10% of what it once was. To fill the labor gap, they started trading cocoa beans and cotton for enslaved Africans. So, while Europe was sipping their fancy hot chocolate, it was being fueled by the horrific exploitation of human beings. It's a grim chapter in chocolate's history. And unfortunately, it won't be the last time chocolate and slavery came together. Back to the nice side of chocolate. Let's talk about how chocolate went from a Spanish secret to a European obsession. First stop, France. In 1615, King Louis XIII married Anne of Austria, a Spanish princess, somehow from Austria. I'm not sure how that worked, but she brought her love of chocolate with her. And just like that, chocolate hit the French court. At first, it was marketed as a medicine, even an aphrodisiac, because if the Aztecs made chocolate creepy, it was up to the French to make it sexy. But it remained super expensive thanks to those pesky transport costs and import duties, like tariffs. Not that we have any problems with tariffs in our modern society. Only the rich and fabulous could afford to indulge. And most of the cacao was coming from Venezuela, which was basically the chocolate capital of the world at the time. Then in 1650, the English got their first taste of chocolate. Thanks to some pirate shenanigans, remember those English pirates who burned the cocoa beans? Well, they eventually figured out what they were missing. And in 1655, when the English snatched Jamaica from the Spanish, they also got their hands on some sweet, sweet cocoa plantations and a laid-back Jamaican lifestyle. But we're concerned with the cocoa plantations here. Again, those high prices meant only the wealthy could afford it. And they were making their cocoa drinks with milk and water, adding sugar and egg yolks, and sometimes even a splash of brandy. They even drank it from small dishes like fancy soup. And chocolate started showing up in coffee houses for anyone who could pay. By the end of the 17th century, it was even being served to the British Navy because apparently sailors needed their chocolate fix too. And just to complete the European chocolate tour, the first chocolate confectionery opened in Paris in 1659. So basically by the 17th century, chocolate was spreading across Europe like a wildfire. And everyone wanted a piece of the, chocolate bar. Except for centuries, chocolate was all about the drink. But things were about to get solid. The first hint of change came in 1674 with the invention of the chocolate lozenge. Basically a fancy chocolate candy, but the real game changer came in the 19th century. First up, Francois Louis Caillet opened the first chocolate factory in Switzerland in 1819. It also featured the first melanger, basically a stone grinder used to refine chocolate and other cooking uses. You can buy small ones for your own kitchen if you want to make your own chocolate, but more on that later. Then in 1828, a Dutch chemist named Conrad Johannes van Houten developed a process for turning cocoa beans into a powder. This meant chocolate could be mass-produced. He even got a patent for his process, which involved removing cocoa butter from the chocolate liquor, creating a cake that could be pulverized into a powder. Chocolate liquor is not some alcoholic drink made with chocolate, it's the liquid result of grinding cocoa beans. The patent allowed for large-scale production of both powdered and solid chocolate. But the real magic happened in 1847 when J.S. Fry and Sons of England added extra cocoa butter to liquid chocolate, turning it solid. And boom! The first mass-produced chocolate bar was born. Finally, people could eat chocolate, not just drink it. And soon after, chocolate makers started adding powdered milk, creating the milk chocolate we all know and love. So thanks to some clever inventions and entrepreneurial spirit, chocolate transformed from a fancy drink to a convenient, delicious bar, paving the way for the chocolate-fueled world we live in today. A world that may be a lot less chocolatey unless we can figure out this cocoa crisis. Now it's time for some industrial scale action. By the late 18th century, chocolate processors started using steam-powered machinery to grind those cocoa beans. In 1780, the first chocolate factory opened in Barcelona, marking the start of mass chocolate production. But the revolution really kicked off in 1879 when Rudolf Lindt of Switzerland invented conking. Now, conking is basically a fancy way of stirring and refining chocolate, heating and agitating the liquid for days to make it super smooth. This is what gives chocolate that silky, melt-in-your-mouth texture we all love. While Europe was perfecting its chocolate making technology, it was also shifting where it got its cocoa. And this shift is what led to the problems we are having today. In the early 19th century, the Portuguese transported cacao tree cuttings to their African colonies. This was a major turning point. Initially, the Portuguese colonies were a major source of cocoa. However, the labor practices were deeply problematic, basically a continuation of slavery under a different name. In the early 1900s, chocolate producers like Cadbury started investigating these practices and discovered the horrific conditions. This led to a boycott of Portuguese plantations by major chocolate companies in 1909. This created a vacuum, which the British colonies, particularly the Gold Coast, which we now call Ghana, were more than happy to fill. Cadbury, for example, switched their sourcing to the Gold Coast, which had a system of smaller, independent farmers. This shift, driven by ethical concerns and economic opportunity, led to the Gold Coast becoming a major cocoa producer. By 1911, Ghana became the largest producer of cocoa beans. Later on, in 1977, the Ivory Coast would take that title. So we see that ethical concerns, along with economic opportunity, had dramatic effects on the location of cocoa growing. And now we're starting to see the opposite effects happening. Let's fast forward through some more chocolate innovations. In 1931, someone finally figured out how to temper chocolate. Tempering is the magic that gives chocolate its glossy shine and satisfying snap. It's the bane of my existence. Well, the bane of my chocolate making existence. Did I tell you I make chocolate as a hobby? That's a big reason why I wanted to make this video, but I still haven't figured out the tempering process. I would be a sponsor of this video with my chocolate, but tempering has to be a thing. Damn you, tempering! Tempering basically controls the crystallization of cocoa butter, and it's what separates the amateur chocolate I make from the pro stuff. Then, in 1936, Nestle decided to throw a curveball and introduced white chocolate. Now, purists might argue that white chocolate isn't real chocolate since it doesn't contain any cocoa solids, and they would be right. But I guess it's still good. It's basically cocoa butter, sugar, and milk, and it's a whole different kind of sweet treat. I knew Nestle was an evil company, but I didn't realize they created the most evil kind of chocolate. But things weren't always smooth sailing in the chocolate world. In 1956, some British chocolate makers started using cheaper fats instead of cocoa butter. This sparked a huge controversy because, well, it changed the texture and flavor of chocolate. By the 1970s, the debate was raging. Eventually, the EU stepped in and regulated that only 5% of chocolate could be these cheaper fats, and the US banned them entirely. So basically, chocolate got its own quality control. And then, in 1984, something amazing happened. Single origin chocolate was born. This was the start of the bean to bar and craft chocolate movement. Basically, chocolate makers started focusing on the unique flavors of cocoa beans from specific regions, like wine connoisseurs with grapes. It was a chocolate revolution. People started caring about the origin of their chocolate, the way it was made, and the farmers who grew the beans. It was the rise of artisan chocolate and a move away from mass-produced chocolates. And with the home melange I mentioned earlier, you can get in on the fun. Buckle up because we're entering the chocolate crisis zone. All those things that happened, all that history has set the stage for the price of cocoa going absolutely bonkers right now. Supply shortages, underinvestment in farms, and a whole lot of trouble in West Africa, which includes Ghana and the Ivory Coast, and produces a massive 80% of the world's cocoa. Essentially, we got the trifecta of doom. First, diseases are ravaging cacao trees, especially in Ghana. Second, climate change is messing with the weather, causing droughts and floods. And third, there's a whole lot of smuggling and illegal mining going on, which is disrupting the supply chains. With all these problems, I wouldn't be surprised if Godzilla showed up and couldn't make it any worse. Basically, all these issues are converging in West Africa, the heart of cocoa production, and it's creating a massive shortage. And when supply goes down, prices go up, way up. It's Economics 101, supply and demand. So get ready to pay a premium for your favorite chocolate bar. We're talking record-breaking prices. Let's talk about the silent killer of the chocolate world, diseases. Specifically, swollen shoot disease. This nasty bug is basically the cacao tree's worst nightmare, and it's causing chaos in West Africa, especially Ghana. Swollen shoot disease is transmitted by mealybugs, tiny little sap-sucking insects. When they feed on cacao trees, they inject this virus that basically slowly kills the trees. The trees get these weird swellings, their leaves turn yellow and molted, and eventually they just wither and die. And the worst part, there's no cure. The only way to stop the spread is to chop down and uproot infected trees, which is too expensive for small cocoa farmers, which make up the majority in the region. Now, this disease isn't new, but it's getting worse. Reports suggest it's responsible for 15% to 50% loss in cocoa production in Ghana. That's a huge chunk of cocoa production gone. And because it takes years for newly planted trees to produce cocoa, this disease is going to have long-term consequences. Then there's Mother Nature. Climate change is seriously messing with weather patterns in West Africa, and that's bad news for cocoa. We're seeing a 1-2 punch of extreme weather. Droughts and floods, and both are devastating for cocoa crops. First, you've got droughts. Imagine trying to grow delicate tropical plant like cocoa in scorching dry conditions. The trees get stressed and they don't produce as many beans, and they're more susceptible to diseases like swollen shoot disease. With rising global temperatures, these droughts are becoming more frequent and intense. And then you've got the floods. When it does rain, it's often in massive torrential downpours which can wash away entire cocoa farms. The soil gets waterlogged, the roots rot, and the trees die. To make matters worse, you have the Harmattan winds. These dusty, dry winds blow in from the Sahara, and they're getting stronger and more frequent. And these winds whip across the cocoa growing regions from about September to March, and they absolutely decimate crops. Climate change is turning West Africa into a chocolate battleground, with farmers struggling to survive against unpredictable extreme weather. And with 80% of the world's cocoa coming from the region, the rest of us are going to feel the pinch in our wallets. Next is the human element in this chocolate catastrophe. It's not just bugs and bad weather causing problems. There's a whole lot of shady business going on in West Africa. Smuggling and illegal gold mining are seriously disrupting the cocoa supply chain. First up is smuggling. Apparently, a significant amount of cocoa is being smuggled out of Ghana into neighboring countries. Why? Well, it's all about the money. Farmers are trying to get the best price for their beans, and sometimes that means bypassing official channels. Reports suggest that as much as 50,000 tons of cocoa have been lost to smuggling in Ghana alone. That's a massive hit to the country's revenue and a big contributor to the global shortage. Then there's the illegal gold mining. This is a huge problem, and it's basically destroying cocoa farms. Illegal miners are tearing up plantations, digging up the land, and polluting the soil and water with toxic chemicals. Think of the small cacao farmer who wakes up one day to their entire crop gone, cut down by miners who illegally took over their land and cut down all the trees to get at the gold in the land. Once the land is destroyed for gold mining, it takes decades for it to recover, if it ever recovers, and that farmer now has no livelihood. Basically, these illegal activities are adding fuel to the fire and making an already bad situation even worse. And they are making it even harder for legitimate cocoa farmers to earn a decent living. It's a sad situation all around. Alright, so we've painted a pretty grim picture of the chocolate crisis. Now the big question, what can we do about it? Well, there's no easy fix, but there are a few things that need to happen. First, we need to address the root causes of the supply shortage. That means investing in sustainable farming practices, developing disease-resistant cocoa varieties, and helping farmers adapt to climate change. This is going to require a lot of money and a long-term commitment. The farmers do not have the capital to do this. If we wish to continue eating chocolate at low prices, rich consumers need to help the farmers out. Second, and this is a big one, support the rule of law. That means cracking down on smuggling and illegal mining. That also means giving small farmers the ability to go after illegal miners stealing or poisoning their land. Governments in West Africa need to enforce regulations and provide farmers with fair prices, so they're not tempted to sell their beans on the black market. Rich Western countries should step up and help the West African countries support the rule of law. Third, we need to rethink the way we consume chocolate. We can't just keep demanding cheap chocolate without considering the impact on farmers and the environment. We need to support ethical and sustainable chocolate brands that pay fair prices to farmers and use environmentally friendly practices. Remember that last invention, single origin chocolate? It's more expensive, and I can assure you it tastes much better. But there's another great thing about it. Remember that single origin in the name? That means it comes from one location. That means that one location better make sure the cocoa it produces is the best, and the buyer needs to be able to pay the best price. In the end, single origin chocolate often leads to farmers getting paid more and making better cocoa. This may not fix the price problem. In fact, it may make prices go higher. Is he really telling us that paying more money for chocolate will make prices go down? Well, no, I'm not. But everything upstream gets better and more sustainable. We need to make sure that the people who grow our cocoa can earn a decent living. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a world without chocolate, and that's a world no one wants to live in. Now, excuse me while I read a nice book by the fire and sip some hot chocolate. But it's too hot for that, so I'm just going to stuff my face full of chocolate bars. Woo! Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe, and a link to our previous video is on screen now on that terrible trillionaire, Scrooge McDuck.